Football is one of the most popular sports in the world, with more than 3 billion fans. That's about 1 in 3 of the global population. But when you talk football to an American, you'll soon discover that what he calls football is something completely different. And he'll tell you that your football is in fact called soccer. And then there's rugby, a close cousin to both, but still a completely different beast. So why the confusion? Let's explore. Ball games go back thousands of years, with evidence of early versions showing up in Mesoamerica and ancient China. At El Manatí in Mexico, a latex ball more than 3,000 years old was discovered in 1992. And ancient Chinese artwork from 2300 BC depicts a ball game being played that looks suspiciously like the football or soccer that we know today. One spectacular version that survives to this day in indigenous Native American communities is fireball, played with a fuel-infused burning sphere and with heavy symbolic and religious overtones. By contrast, medieval football in Europe was a brutal free-for-all, usually mentioned in historical record either as a footnote to some murder or to announce the latest attempt by authorities to have it outlawed. In fact, one could be forgiven for mistaking the unregulated chaos of mob football for a riot. There was no limit on the number of players per team, and few rules other than gaining possession of the ball at all costs. But that doesn't mean it did not have its fans. There's an English town in Warwickshire that's been hosting an annual match on Shrove Tuesday since before the signing of the Magna Carta. The 800-year tradition of the Atherston ball game was broken for the first time in 2021 due to COVID-19 restrictions. According to clothes historian Dr. Maria Hayward, Henry VIII, well known for his sporting prowess, owned a pair of football boots, and Oliver Cromwell allegedly spent more time playing football than studying during his time at Cambridge University. But sometime during the Victorian era, football tightened up its act and split into 2 completely different games. Legend suggests that we have a Lancashire schoolboy to thank for that. But did William Webb Ellis really play such an important role in the invention of rugby? The answer, of course, is a little more complicated. It's January 1872, and in a cottage on the French Riviera, a 65-year-old English clergyman has just passed away. He had been a bachelor, and his main claim to fame was a sermon on the Crimean War, which appeared in the Illustrated London News, along with his portrait almost 18 years earlier. But 4 years after his death, a story about this former rector of St. Clement Danes emerged that would change everything and make him world famous. His name was William Webb Ellis, and he has since become known as the father of rugby. It is unclear whether the incident in question took place in 1823 or 1824, but the location was the public school at Rugby in Warwickshire, where a football game of sorts was in progress. In the heat of the fray, one of the players, William Webb Ellis, caught the ball with his hands and ran with it. At the time, this dashing action was against the rules. That's probably what made it so memorable. But over the next 20 years, the rules would change, and William Webb Ellis's style of playing would become the norm, at least for this version of football. By 1890, Game rules fell under the authority of the Rugby Football Union, and they would later commemorate Webb Ellis as founding player by naming their most prestigious award after him. All of this lore was based on the strength of one letter to a school publication. And the letter writer, Matthew Bloxham, couldn't even name the so-called witness who had told him this story. While William Webb Ellis certainly existed and attended the public school at Rugby as a scholarship pupil, it can't really be established beyond doubt that he invented modern rugby. Also, around the mid to late 1800s, another version of football was being standardized with a different rulebook. And its chief advocate almost lost the struggle before he'd even begun. Meet Ebenezer Cobb Morley. He's a native of Hull who's built himself a successful legal career in London. And he's also a keen football player. In 1862, his enthusiasm for the game leads to the foundation of the Barnes Football Club. This is one of the first football clubs in southwest London, where he lived. On 29 November, Barnes Football Club, captained by Morley himself, ran onto the field for their first match against another southwest London team. It went well for Barnes. They scored 2 goals and won the day. Their second match against Blackheath Football Club was a disaster. Not only did Barnes lose, but Captain Ebenezer Cobb Morley was very nearly garroted by opposing players. This disaster of a match exposed an important fault line in the world of 19th century football. The teams of Barnes and Blackheath were playing by completely different rules. This unique insight as a trained lawyer and a footballer, Morley outlined the problem in a letter to Bell's Life, a weekly sports newspaper of the era. Morley argued that the game needed rules and a governing body. The next step seemed obvious. It's Monday night, 26 October 1863, and the Freemasons Tavern on Great Queen Street in London's West End is abuzz with heated discussion. Delegates from various football clubs are weighing in on where they think the game should go, but there is no agreement as yet. Even Morley himself, who made such a compelling argument in that letter, was now all over the place. Initially, he had been in favour of rules that allowed players to pass the ball with their hands, as in rugby. But then came a surprising twist. By the time the newly formed Football Association met for the second time to discuss those rules Ebenezer Cobb Morley had drafted, the great man himself had changed his mind. Morley had switched to Team Cambridge. You're probably wondering what that means. Cambridge football rules outlawed elements such as handplay, tripping and hacking, which in turn removed some of the more confusing rules of the game. This unexpected turnaround bewildered the other delegates, who were ready to vote in Morley's first set of rules. By the third meeting, however, the majority agreed to support this suggestion. The game played by the Football Association clubs had now become distinct from rugby. In the early days, this new incarnation of football was called Associated Football, which later became a bastardized abbreviation, soccer. The very first match under Football Association took place between Barnes and Richmond on 19 December 1863. This was an interesting lineup. Why? Because a mere 7 years later, Richmond Football Club would play a leading role in the founding of another organization, the Rugby Football Union. But despite this twist, the Football Association would go on to create the FA Cup tournament and exert massive influence on the creation of FIFA on 21 May 1904, despite not bothering to join until 2 years later. So now we have met two of football's founding fathers. One, a compelling myth inserted posthumously. The other, a deliberate designer of gameplay whose innovations resulted in a template still adhered to today. But is there a third figure we should know about? Who created American football? Well, color the early American footballers somewhat confused about which direction to go with their game. When two college teams, Rutgers and Princeton, faced off on the 6th of November 1869, they were still playing a game based on associated football, aka soccer, albeit with 25 players per team. But that would soon change. By 1875, American football teams had switched to the rugby union model, and the team size had shrunk to just 15 players per side. Enter Walter Chauncey Camp, despite his scrawny size, a talented halfback for Yale, who would later go on to a successful coaching career. In 1880, Camp introduced the scrimmage lineup as an alternative to the rugby union scrum, as a device for getting the ball back into play. He is also credited with adding rules about the free kick and the snapback as a maneuver, as well as limiting team size to just 11 players. And just when you thought football can't get any more confusing, Canada enters the conversation. Of course, you'd think that, as a member of the Commonwealth, they'd stick to a version of football played in England, Scotland, Wales, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. But no can do. While the Canadians play a game that seems based on American football, they have added several slight changes, for no other reason than being Canadian, I suppose. A slightly larger field, 12 players instead of 11 per team, 3 downs instead of 4 to move the ball. I'm not going to go any further with that. You can tell me in the comments if you play Canadian. So there you have it, a brief excursion through the origin stories of football, rugby, soccer, and a spin-off or two. Which version do you follow? What team do you support? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, consider helping the channel by subscribing. We at Word Goblins will be back.